we are currently living through a very interesting time period in the UFC. A time period where, frankly, wrestling is dying. Wrestlers are a dying breed. It's a thing of the past, something from a bygone era. Which, it's so crazy because for the longest time, everybody considered wrestling the undisputed best base for MMA. I mean, it would get to the point that if you had never wrestled before, people would tell you not even to attempt to compete in MMA. They would say there's no point. You're going to fight a wrestler. They're going to take you down. They're going to hold you down. They're going to do really bad things to you. They're going to take your dignity away. And you're not going to get that back ever. You're not going to get it back. So there's no point in even attempting to compete in mixed martial arts without a wrestling background. But it is safe to say that is changing. Something I've discussed before on the channel is the fact that strikers are starting to dominate the sport. And that is for a number of reasons, but it's getting to a point now that even past that, it's that wrestling, really is dying. Wrestlers just don't have the same success as they used to. If you go ahead and navigate over to the UFC rankings, I want you guys to look at every single champion and see if you notice a very interesting pattern here. Alexandre Pantoja is certainly a grappler, but not a wrestler. Sean O'Malley, not a wrestler. Ilia Topuria, not a wrestler. Islam Makhachev has never had a wrestling match a day in his life, never ever competed under a wrestling rule set. Leon Edwards never wrestled, Dricus didn't wrestle, Alex Pereira sure as hell didn't wrestle, and neither did Tom Aspinall. Did you guys notice the pattern? Is that none of these guys have wrestled. That may have been more clear than I originally anticipated, but none of these guys have wrestled. It's just so shocking to me that you would assume there would be so many more wrestlers there, given the fact that, wrestling, it's still considered by most to be the best base for MMA, but I'm here to tell you, it just isn't anymore. It's not, and it's for a plethora of reasons. Three big ones, I would say, one of those reasons a bit bigger than the other two. Starting off, and as I alluded to earlier, this is something that I've discussed before on the channel, but when you watch wrestling at the highest level, you rarely ever see pins. A pin is where you get your opponent flat on their backs. At the highest level of the sport, pins are so rare to come by. Guys are just too good. And for the longest time in MMA, wrestlers consistently pinned strikers, and they were completely helpless to stop it. But as strikers continuously become higher and higher level wrestlers, pins are going to continue to get rarer and rarer, and that is what we're seeing. Alex Pereira, Sean O'Malley, Leon Edwards, these guys who do not come from wrestling backgrounds have at this point been wrestling for years. And of course, they're not nearly as good as the other guys in their division, but they don't need to be because they're not having a wrestling match. As long as they can prevent the pin, that's all that matters, because on the feet, all three of those guys have such a massive advantage. And another big reason that I've also discussed a lot on the channel is the fact that the judging criteria, it really doesn't favor wrestlers in the sense that, it clearly says right here, top and bottom fighters are judged more so on their actions rather than their position. So it doesn't really matter if you're on the top or you're on the bottom. What matters is, what are you doing? Are you contributing to the potential end of the fight? Your position does not matter. It does not matter at all. And this does bring us into issue number 2 with wrestling, right? Let's say you get somebody flat on their back, you're pinning them, you're holding them as tight as you possibly can. It's going to be extremely difficult for them to get back up. There's a lot of famous videos of Khabib rolling with Luke Rockhold. And Khabib has him in side control. He's pinning him as hard as he can, and it's really, really difficult for Luke Rockhold to get up. But, of course, you're never going to see a video of them starting in a neutral position. It's always Khabib fully locked in on side control. And, of course, it doesn't matter who you are. It's going to be difficult to stand back up when someone's just purely trying to pin you. But in order to score, in order to be effective in MMA, you either need to go for submissions or you need to strike. And the second you're striking, you are no longer pinning. The second you move forward to advance in position to go for a submission, again, you're no longer pinning. And if you're not pinning, that gives guys the opportunity to get back up. And as I just said before, that didn't matter because the skill level between strikers and wrestlers in the grappling department was too massive, but it's just not the case anymore. The second the wrestler starts unloading with punches, gives the striker the perfect opportunity to stand back up. And then all of a sudden, you taking that guy down and holding him down for 45 seconds without doing any damage, without advancing in position at all, without going for any submissions, that wasn't worth anything on the judging criteria at all. Nothing. That was practically useless. at least useless in terms of scoring. Of course, in a fight, it could be important to not let the striker know what you're going to do, make them worry about your potential takedowns, but we're looking just purely at scoring. It's not scored for anything. Now, the second big reason, but I mean, not the biggest reason, we'll get to that in a second, but the second reason I want to look at is the fence. Because the fence is where most of the grappling takes place in MMA, and it's sort of a completely different sport. I mean, in fence wrestling, an Olympic gold medalist can lose to a Division III wrestler in Henry Cejudo versus Aljamain Sterling. I mean, Olympic gold medalist versus Division III wrestler. You know what I mean? That the gap between them should be astronomical. And out in the open, we saw it was. But up against the fence, all of a sudden, all those years of wrestling didn't really translate there. So when, again, that same guy, Aljamain Sterling, is fighting Sean O'Malley, Aljo is the way better wrestler, the way better grappler, but up against the fence, you know, their skill level was more or less kind of, I mean, of course you're going to give the edge to Aljo, but he couldn't take Sean down up against there. I mean, he couldn't. So, I mean, let me ask you right now, let's say you're a young kid whose dream is to compete in MMA. Are you going to wrestle all the way to the Olympics? I mean, that's cool. It's not going to help you when it comes to fence wrestling, which is the most important aspect of wrestling in MMA, it seems like these days. So, you know, why would you take wrestling that far when the sport you're looking to transfer into competes in a completely different rule set where now you have to worry about a barrier? You're wrestling up against a barrier where all your wrestling skills sort of go out the window. Certain things translate, but, you know, it's not the same. It just simply isn't the same. But all right, enough blue balling, you guys. This, to me, is the number one reason why we're seeing wrestlers flounder in MMA. Why we're seeing them currently drowning with their heads peeking out of the water, just praying to get pulled out. To wrestle effectively in MMA, the number one thing you need to be able to do is to manage, control, and close distance. I mean, that is the absolute number one thing, and unfortunately, that area is dominated by strikers. And it's for this reason of controlling and maintaining distance that when Khabib fought Conor McGregor, Khabib, for the first time in his career, circled the octagon. Khabib was always known for walking you down, marching right at you, pushing you up against the fence and taking you down. But the thing that Conor McGregor was so praised for was his ability to control, maintain distance, catch you coming in. So what Khabib did, he circled, and then he shot from halfway across the octagon, which that should not have worked. I mean, it did. You know, of course, Khabib's pretty good, but it was a really difficult takedown for Khabib to finish. The fact he even got a hold of Conor's leg from jumping that far was a bit of a miracle. I'm just being honest. But that is why he did that, because the gap between them in distance management was so huge. And again, that's the reason why Sean O'Malley beat Aljamain Sterling. Peter Yan is not nearly the grappler Aljamain Sterling is, but he had a lot of success with takedowns against Sean because of how he can control and close distance with his striking. Using his striking to get on the inside and being just really dangerous allowed him to get deep on takedowns. But Aljamain Sterling, the way better wrestler, could not close that distance for the life of him. I mean, he was only able to do it twice. For the most part, it was him trying to close the distance, Sean constantly circling, feinting, showing him he's ready to attack, and Aljo, eventually he had to just rush in where he got countered. And again, this was the exact same thing we saw in the about round and a half we saw of Amir Muhammad versus Leon Edwards. You have Amir, who's a way better wrestler than Leon Edwards, but Leon was controlling the distance between them so much better. He was putting Amir on the back foot because Amir could not get any respect with his striking, and it's so hard to shoot takedowns off your back foot. Same exact thing with Colby versus Leon. So many people were amazed that Colby Covington fought so scared. He just didn't even seem like he tried to go after Leon. The reason for that was every single time Colby tried to move forward with punches, he was getting countered over and over and over again because he couldn't maintain the distance between them. He had to attempt to take bad shots out in the open that are going to get defended just so easily. In order to be effective in wrestling, you need to be able to set up your takedowns well, and in order to do that, you need to be able to close the distance, and strikers are so much better at that than wrestlers are. And like I said, to me, that is just the number one biggest hurdle they have to get over. Now, of course, if you take a guy who wrestled his whole life and then at age 18 he starts striking, becomes a master at striking, of course, that's going to be a serious problem. But as of right now, that's just not what we're seeing. Right now, what the meta we're seeing in MMA, the best fighters in the world are rangy kickboxers with good takedown defense and just a dangerous amount of power and accuracy. That right now is the meta in MMA. And of course, it's going to grow and continue to evolve. And who knows what the next meta is going to be. But as of now, if wrestlers do not want to die in MMA, they need to evolve. They need to evolve because just simply getting a hold of the guy you're fighting doesn't work anymore. And that's what a lot of these guys still depend on, and that is why wrestling, as of right now, is dying in MMA.